It's a podcast. You're listening to Gorehead and The Wiener.
Doctor dude.
Okay, we're recording now.
Ooh, it says it. It's his house too.
Ooh,
That's
yes.
so official.
Welcome to a very casual episode of Gorehead and the Wiener.
In the morning.
Gorehead and the Wiener in the morning.
It is in the morning.
It is in the morning. Yeah.
More for me than you, but
I mean, I've been very tired this week, so I'm just like, yeah.
Oh
It's
god,
an accomplishment to be here and recording something.
Yeah, I feel very I'm very proud of myself that I actually managed to do something outside of just work and sleep.
Yeah, it's like work is starting to like chill out a little bit over here, so hopefully we can get these like more regularly. But yeah, so we watched His House last weekend. Yeah, and it's like a different type of a horror movie that I haven't really seen anything like it, which was really cool to see. And it's cool to see something that had sort of like witches, but like a different type of witch from Africa.
Yeah, it was like, it's not like the Wicked Witch of the West. She's riding around on a broom. It's a horrible naked man that scares the shit out of you.
Well, there's a lot going on. I guess, like, as a brief summary, you probably will do a better job than me summarizing it.
So this movie is about essentially the writer, screenplay creator, and director of the movie. They're one and the same. Was really surprised by how many immigrants and what is it when you run away from, you have to run from your
Escape?
Refugees. There we go. I was like, the one where you're not willingly going, you're going because it's way worse where you're coming from. Yeah, so they're African refugees, and they're actually from specifically the South Sudan. That's the story takes place, or the backstory takes place in Africa, and they're fleeing the country. And in the beginning of the movie, you don't really know why they're fleeing, but you just know that it wasn't good. And so they come to Britain and jolly old England, and they get put into a halfway house, essentially, so that they can prove to the British government that they're good people that will be contributors to society. And so that's a really strong running theme through the whole thing, is that they want to, at least the husband wants to present themselves in a way that is like the same for the British people, to make them feel comfortable. And a lot of the conflict of the movie kind of comes between the wife wanting to hold on to what they used to have in Africa, and the husband wanting to just completely forget about it. And that sets up the conflict between the two of them, and also sets up the horror of, and this, they essentially flee from this place, do a bunch of terrible things to get there, and because of that, they are haunted by a horrifying African witch that is called an Epeth. And the Epeth is kind of like, the closest other movie that I thought of was like The Grudge, which is that Japanese horror movie where if you go into this house, this horrible woman will murder you in some way, and you're super fucked. Once you get in the house, you're done. It's like, you're in the house, you're cursed, you're dead. Like, you're
dead forever.
Yeah, it doesn't. You could burn the house down. It doesn't matter. That shit is still coming for you. It's like, and the Epeth is the same way. It follows them from Africa, and you don't exactly know why it follows them through the movie, but it essentially is like PTSD. That is like what I think is the strongest representation, is that this thing is just forcing you to relive the worst moments of this guy's life, even though he's trying his damnedest to pretend that it never happened. And
Yeah.
so much so that he burns all of the possessions that they bring from Africa just so that he hopes that this thing will go away. Of course, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so essentially, they live in this horrible halfway house, and that
Oh my
place
god.
is so depressing. It is like they found the worst place to film. It is such a horrible home. It's just like the wallpapers are peeling off with black mold. There's leftover food in the house, just rotting, and bugs, and electricity doesn't work. And like the whole time, this English guy who's played by Doctor Who, Matt
Yeah.
Smith,
Matt Smith, yay.
his least caring role to date.
Yeah, it's like this character did not make me like Matt Smith very much, but
No, he was like, yeah, Matt Smith's great at being a dickhead.
it's nice though because I feel like this type of representation of seeing what it's like to move to a new place for refugees is so like it's just not represented at all
Yeah,
in
yeah.
film. Like you just don't see that very often, and just like for me, move like I am still in Canada, but I moved to a place where everyone speaks French, and now I'm just like, how like you don't understand how limiting it is to be in a new location until you've actually done it. And my experience is so much more lame compared to like someone moving from
Well,
Africa.
yeah, having to
But
flee,
it's
leave all of their family, friends, loved
yeah,
ones, all of their
everything,
possessions.
their
Just
entire culture, and nobody understands them. They see like one interesting moment is like they see other people in Britain, and it's actually a group of young boys that look like they could be from the same culture, but they grew up in Britain, so they are British,
mhm,
but they treat her so terribly, and it's sort of like you just get that feeling as soon as she walks up to them, and
mhm. I know.
she
I
was
was like, I've never felt dread for her. I thought she was gonna get like beaten up or something, and I was afraid for her when she approaches these young
yeah.
boys because you're like, oh, they're not gonna treat her well. She has an accent, and even though they're from the same, technically
It looks like
the same culture, they
they have
are
the same
not.
ethnicity, but
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, their culture is completely different at this point. And like, I think a lot of the horror in this movie isn't even necessarily like the horror that you would expect it to be. It's not gonna be like a slasher film necessarily. A lot of like the vast majority of the movie, the horror is just like the horror of life and PTSD and memories that haunt you, um, as opposed to going into this expecting it to just be like a cheap slasher film. I think it has more depth than you would expect, but it's still done simply, which I really appreciated. Like
Yeah,
it's a very like simple story, but they presented it in a way that it's not just like surface level, which is cool.
yeah, you can definitely tell like the budget for it wasn't high, but they
Yeah.
just use everything so well. And like they found the perfect house, and that's where majority of the movies filmed. And they just they're really good at making them feel so alone and isolated in this house, even though they're
Yeah.
surrounded by other houses. They're the only people like them there, and everyone's just kind of horrible, like trashy
Uh,
redneck British people. It's the
'Cause
rednecks of Britain.
they're in like a terrible neighborhood where everyone is poor, everyone hates their life, and they're trying to stay positive in this absolutely like this black mold infested building where like the wallpaper is peeling off and it's just black mold underneath. There's literal holes in the walls, and there's like rats and
Oof.
birds living in the wall. There are
Yeah,
crows
a crow shoots out of
living in the
and
walls, and like
that's what
nothing was clean. There was they walked in and there was just like an old pizza container with maggots in it, and it was like, who the hell gives people, especially like refugees, like this is their first experience coming to a new country and they're given like the absolute worst like
Well, and
situation or yeah.
it's interesting because they do have that, like, a rehearsed line that Matt Smith keeps saying, where he's like, "Oh, this place is bigger than mine," like, and he's trying to, like,
Oh
tell
god,
them
yeah.
that this place is actually a good place, even though, like, they can't even open the front door properly. It's like, oh, I'll get someone to fix that, and
Yeah,
they
because
and when
as
he
if like the size of the apartment makes it better somehow. It's like I think I
yeah
would rather live in a shoebox that has no mold or mice than live in a giant mansion that has its walls falling down.
yeah, like a structural hazard, like you're afraid that this building is going to collapse on you at any
God, yeah,
moment. And yeah, they repeat it again too when he goes back and he tries to get a new place to live after the horror starts. They actually, all three of them, he goes to this little office and they all just verbatim say the exact same thing. Oh, his place is bigger than mine. He's like, oh, I would love to live
yeah,
there. And it's just this kind of repetitive thing that they're, like, trained to say, like, stop complaining or else, we'll ship you back to where you came from, essentially. And that's the threat of the whole movie as well, is that they are trying to balance between dealing with, like, all the horrors that they had to face running away from their country, but then also trying to appease all of these government assholes who just belittle them so much and think that they're just a nuisance. And so they just keep saying, you're going to be one of the good ones, right? Show them that you're one of the good ones.
ugh,
And it's
I hated
just
that
so
line so much.
it's
One of the
so
good ones.
patronizing. Yeah, you're one of the
Yeah,
good ones, right? Just fuck you, man. It's like, of course these people are traumatized. Like, you don't give them any help. They've fled their country and they're just, like, hoping that they can stay, because if they go back, they'll probably just get murdered.
yeah. And the huge thing too that I noticed is like so many people just don't have any, they can't even fathom what these people have gone through, so they don't even, they don't try necessarily to
Yeah.
understand them, and it's like these people are clearly traumatized trying their best, but the world around them refuses to understand where they're coming from. They just expect them to assimilate immediately into their surroundings, when it's like they, I don't know, they come from a completely different world. I don't know how anyone can expect someone to just, oh yeah, just get out, go involve yourself in the community, get into the church. It's like, yeah, it's not like they didn't move from like the States to Britain. They moved from a place that was completely annihilated by war and gunfire, and they escaped barely with their lives.
Yeah.
I don't know how they're supposed to assimilate into culture immediately.
Well, and they do a good job of, because, like, the wife and the husband are in very two different sides of what they think
Yes,
should
yeah,
happen, and they do a good job of just showing that, she didn't even want to leave the place that she fled from. Like, it wasn't that she wanted to leave, it was that
yeah.
the situation was so horrible she had to leave, but she struggles with that through the entire movie. It's just trying to wrap her mind around that she has to live in this place that she thinks is an inferior place, even though everyone keeps telling her that it's amazing and she's so lucky to be there, but she sees it for what it really is. And it's like this horrible, like, she sees the physical surroundings and that's all. And I guess that's the struggle between the two of them, is that she doesn't understand that this is like a new chance to not be dead. She's lucky that she's murdered. And so she has an
Yeah,
opportunity to live on when other people couldn't, and she can hopefully, honor them by living on when, everyone else around her is unfortunately dead. And so she can live on for them. And that I think that's the beautiful ending to the movie, is that she comes to the realization that, she got to survive and she was lucky for still having a life, and because of that, everyone who didn't make it lives on in her and with them. And that's the very end shot of the movie,
yes,
is
yeah.
them standing there with everyone from her village around her. And, they say it's like, they all live here with us.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
like I at least thought it was a very beautiful way to kind of like sum up a ghost story, where it's like the ghosts are
Yeah.
always with you. It's just if you are trying to ignore them or if you accept them. And it's like the whole movie is just about accepting your circumstances and being grateful that you're still alive, essentially. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think yeah, so I wanted to actually touch on how they got from um, the point where so they are struggling in this house. Basically, they've moved from Africa. They've escaped this horrible war, and it isn't really revealed until later what exactly they escaped from. So we could touch on that,
mm-hmm.
but or like what the terrible thing was that they did and all that. That's not really revealed until later. But yeah, we should talk about the point because we're sort of just introduced to them
Hmm.
moving into Britain and they're struggling and this the husband is sort of seeing weird things happening in the house to the ending when things are sort of resolved. So yeah, so how would you how do I explain this properly? So yeah, because we missed out that middle bit.
Yeah, the apeth. So this thing that haunts them is the apeth, and it's an African witch doctor, kind of.
Yes.
And they talk about how it's like a person that people get haunted by, or they can go to like ask them for things, but it doesn't generally, it requires like a sacrifice. And so through their misdeeds, which you don't understand yet, they are haunted by this apeth, and it is essentially trying to force them both to understand the trauma that they have gone through and like how they got there. And so they both see these visions at night, and it starts with the holes in the walls, and that shit is it's pretty effective at just with most of the horror happens within this one living room area where
Yeah.
there is this hole in the corner of the wall, and a lot of shit comes out of that hole. And it's this horrifying little girl with this like mask over her face, and she looks like a normal like African tribal girl, but with this horrifying like flesh
Yeah.
mask.
The
And
mask is mangled a little bit. Like
it
it
kind of
looks
looks like
like a
human skin.
yeah.
But yeah, and she's got a knife, and she's running around in the walls, and every once in a while she pops out of the fucking wall and just like run at the guy and like jump on him, and that's where a lot of the horror comes from, is this terrifying little girl. And at first you don't really know if it's maybe there is a girl living in the walls. There's been plenty of movies about people living in the walls. It's kind of stupid how many there are.
There's a
Uh,
lot.
yeah, there's a lot. It's a whole genre of people living in the walls. And so, thankfully, this movie is not about a girl living in the walls. Instead, it's a ghost. And so, at first, they're both haunted by these visions, but then the wife much sooner accepts what the witch doctor is saying, and they essentially the witch doctor wants a life sacrifice for what they took. And so that's kind of the vagueness in the beginning, is that they took something and they need to pay with their life, essentially. And if they do that, they will get their daughter back. And so they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess that makes sense. But then as the movie unfolds, every night he's visited by this witch doctor, and he's shown these horrible things. And it starts with like a watery rope. You know that they had to go through a really strong, like a struggle with like on a boat in the ocean. You don't exactly know why, but and there's something to do with a bus. And then essentially through the course of the movie, you find out that they came from a village where it was completely slaughtered by rebels or some sort of rival faction. Like they very briefly kind of mention the wife at one point mentions how she just said I was from a different tribe, and the two tribes don't like each other, and the one tribe wanted to wipe out the other tribe, and that was essentially it. And so because of that, they had to leave. And there's this really kind of powerful scene near the end of the movie where she steps outside the house because she actually is afraid to go outside. Like, she really doesn't feel welcome in Britain, and she feels that it's just dangerous, and she wants to leave very badly. She wants to hold on to her roots, while the husband, on the other hand, embraces it, and he goes out into London. He tries to go to a pub. He's singing a British like soccer song. It shows him in like the big mall looking at white people in pictures and idolizing them, thinking that,
Yeah.
oh, he buys the clothes that they wear in the photo so that he can try and fit in more. He gets a haircut to look more like them.
Oh, that scene was so sad too because he's going to the mall and you see security guards just looking at him, expecting him to steal shit. And he's looking at clothes and just looking up at the photos of the people like on the wall and
Mm-hmm.
like it's like, oh, that I should get this. He's wearing it. And so he goes and buys it. But like it's just sad because it's not
Yeah.
even it's not followed up on. It's just sort of like a background thing where the security guard is like keeping an eye on him. He's about to like walk up and then he sees him just pick it up and like go,
Yeah,
you know.
I think that's a really effective part of the movie is that they're able to constantly fill you with dread every time they're
Yes,
around a white
that's a
person. You're like,
good
what is
feeling.
this horrible white person gonna do to them? Like, get away from him, Whitey! Like, fuck off! It's
Yeah,
so horrifying that like every time they're like either treated as idiots or criminals, and those are the two states that they those are the only two assumptions that people make about them is that they're either dumb or going to commit a crime. And it's never completely stated or done in such an obvious way that like, oh, they physically get attacked by white people. Like, that never happens in the movie. It's just the dread that something could happen anytime that they're around, and that they're constantly being judged for doing nothing, but they're just
yeah.
trying to fucking
You
live.
do. You feel like that sense of dread and horror for this couple basically throughout the whole movie. So yeah, that's a good way to describe it. But yeah,
Yeah.
sorry to cut you off. You were talking about how the husband he basically just wants to forget the past and he wants to just basically exist in Britain as if this was all he ever was and just
Yeah.
ignore everything that had happened to him. Whereas the wife was like, no, this is my culture. I want to remember my mother tongue. I want to hold on to my family heirlooms. I don't care to dress like everyone else here.
Hmm.
I'm here to, she's here to escape what happened, but at the same time, she's kind of regretting that she wants to go back home.
Yeah, she loved her life. She loved all the people in it, and she misses her old life. And she sees how, even though there aren't people shooting her here, it's her new life is almost worse in a way. Like, is it better to flee and survive or stay and die where you were happy? And that's kind of the question that it brings up in the movie as well is, did they is it the right choice? Like, what is the right choice? And I think that it does a good job of saying that there isn't really, it's such a complicated thing that there is no right choice. It's
Yeah.
what you believe to be the right choice is the right choice.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he essentially starts kind of going more and more crazy throughout the movie, and and but meanwhile, the wife accepts the epeth essentially, and she starts talking to it, and she starts relaying messages to him for the horrifying witch doctor that you don't see a lot of, but it's very good at vaguely showing him in the background. Like, he's just this looming shadow. You can see he's very big, and he has these horrifying blue eyes. These
Yeah.
really intense, piercing blue eyes, and you see those every once in a while. And it's telling him that essentially they took a life, and so they need to pay for it with a life, and that the only way, but if they do that, they'll get their daughter back. Um, but then throughout the course of the movie, the most tragic thing you realize is that the Apeth shows the wife, who's constantly going on about their daughter, and she's playing with this doll throughout the movie, and she makes like a necklace out of the doll's dress. And so you're like, oh, they must have lost their daughter. And they didn't,
Yeah.
because turns out yes, a young girl did die during the travels with them, but it's much, much more shocking because it turns out that they stole a little girl to trick the bus driver who is bringing the refugees out of town. The bus is full, everyone's trying to get on, there's tons of people screaming, and literal gunfire is happening around them. They had just fled a school that was completely massacred. All of her friends are dead. She hid in a cupboard and was the only survivor. And then the husband comes, gets her away, and makes this horrible decision. But at the same time, they are alive only
It saved their
because
lives. Yeah.
of that. And that's where the debt comes in, is because they take this little girl and then show her as their daughter. And it gets worse because when they get on the bus, you see the real mother outside of the bus, and the little girl starts screaming for her mom. And they just keep pretending that it's their kid, and no one's paying attention because there's so much carnage happening around them. And they drive off, and you just see the final shots of this poor mom running after the bus, and then she just falls over, and you can only assume that she's pretty much dead.
Yeah.
And so at that point, the poor little girl is obviously panicking and freaking out. And this is also the same little girl that's been haunting the dad the whole movie.
Yeah.
You realize that it's just her with this horrible skin mask on, and it's they're on this boat, and for whatever reason, the boat capsizes, and everyone spills out into the ocean. And the husband then makes a second choice where he has a choice between saving the little girl or saving his wife. And he saves his wife and leaves the little girl to drown in the ocean. And that is the reason why they're haunted, is because of the fact that they abandoned this. They took this girl from her mom, ruined her life for the little bit that she had left, and then just killed her in the ocean anyway. So it's like, why the hell couldn't you just leave her with her mom? Like, you made this poor little girl's end of life miserable. Like, she had to suffer, like nothing but
Yeah.
suffering until she died. It was like a horrible way to die. And so the mom is so guilt stricken by that she understands that essentially they do have to pay for what they did. And but she doesn't even remember actually at first that it wasn't their daughter. And that is what the Apeth shows her, is that, oh yeah, by the way, the girl that you said your daughter isn't your daughter, you fucking liar. You actually just took a girl and keep saying that it's your daughter, so you gotta
Yeah.
own up to that shit.
And they're both so traumatized that it's like, in any other situation you'd kind of see them as the villain, but
Mhm.
because of this super traumatizing thing where the wife, she was basically in the same room when all of her friends were completely gunned down and murdered. She escaped that, and so she is just completely broken. Like, she cannot even register what is going on anymore. Like,
Mhm.
her brain is just in survival mode. She's in a daze. They walk off to this bus. Her husband is doing shit, and she's just kind of like, when people are staring straight ahead and they have ringing in their ears, it's kind of
Yeah.
like she's in that permanent state of like, what the fuck is happening, going along with it. And I almost see the husband a little bit more like the villain throughout the whole thing, because he actively makes these choices and she goes along with it. But at the same time, when you get to the end of the movie, you're kind of like, well, she's not innocent though, because she also just said nothing. She didn't, and even though they go through all of that trauma, there is still this horrific thing that they did, and it's a messy thing to kind of, as a viewer, to understand and try to put sides on because you can't. It's so gray and it's so muddy because you can understand why they did it, and but that doesn't make it any better. It's just kind of like, well, what would you do in that situation? Because like
Yeah, you know
we're
that,
all
that
human and we all want to survive at the end of the day. But if you did something like that, I think you would be going through very similar emotions as what is depicted in this movie and
and haunted by
haunted. Yeah,
the
that's the right
corpse,
word.
the bodies that you essentially left in your wake. Like that,
Yeah,
I don't think anybody survives a journey like that without having to see or leave someone behind.
yeah,
And it's just again, I just keep thinking like, I'm sure glad I live in Canada.
me
Oh,
too.
calm Canada. Like, you know.
There were
Whew.
some really beautiful cinematic scenes though in this movie that I was super impressed with. Before we get to like the gory climax of the movie, which happens
Which
right before the ending that you have already described. But there's some beautiful cinematic scenes where the husband, he have we even said their names?
no.
Bull and Rial. That's
Oh,
what it,
okay.
that's their names. Um, from South Sudan.
Hmm. I really like.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
they have like they have like the traditional like tribal scars too, like their scar tattoos. And
yes,
there's like one point where the wife is in the hospital giving blood, and the nurse comments on one on her arm, and she talks about how she gave it to herself after her daughter died.
yeah,
And so that's kind of like the beginning of you thinking that she has a daughter.
right, yeah. So Bol is the husband, and I don't know how to pronounce that. It's spelled Bol,
Okay.
and Rial is the wife, and that's spelled Rial. Um, but yeah, Bol, the husband, he's just sitting in the kitchen, I believe, and it sort of just cuts to, well, I don't know how to describe it, but like basically it's like the table that he's sitting at and the wall behind him, it just sort of starts, there's like all this fog starts seeping in and the camera slowly pulls out and it shows him just sitting in this like super torn down house, this
It looks
one little
bombed.
wall, and it's like it's floating on the ocean with all this mist coming up, and it's sort of like just showing him eating dinner, like completely ignoring all of his past as he's clearly like just on in the middle of the ocean alone, ignoring everything. I don't know how to
It
describe it properly, but it
looks
was
like
so
he's denying his trauma essentially, like he's trying to
completely, and
bury it.
yeah, and it's like he's just barely surviving, just floating on the surface of this ocean of trauma that he's escaped. And it also represents, obviously, that he escaped to Britain on the ocean and almost died by capsizing.
Hmm.
Um, but it was just such a good visualization that I was pretty impressed by that, just with the low budget of the movie itself.
And
Um,
also, well, another important part of that scene is his use of utensils, because that's like a
yeah,
running thing throughout the movie. Is that, you know, in African culture they don't have metal utensils; they use their
yeah,
hands. They eat with their fingers. They use bread. They
yeah.
don't. And so the husband is constantly trying to get his wife to use utensils throughout the
And
movie.
it's silly because, yeah, excuse me, Rial is just using her bread, and she's using bread to scoop up the stew that she's eating, which is great. That's a great way to eat stew, I would say.
Yeah.
And and Bull is just immediately like, "Stop! Put the bread down. Use your utensils. We need to fit in here." It's like
Mhm. We have
no
to
one is
show
going to
them we're
question
wonderfully
you.
cooked.
No
Oh,
one
yeah,
cares if you're eating with bread. Like,
this is
and
the
it's such a
time.
small thing.
It's like you don't have to deny everything about what your old life used to be. Like, and that just goes to show, yeah, their stark contrast of how they think about their situation, and how he's just trying to pretend that nothing ever happened and that he is always a British man, and that is it.
Yeah,
And she's, she comments on the taste of the utensils. Now they taste like metal,
She doesn't
and
want the metal in her mouth. Yeah.
yeah, and so that becomes a stronger, like, point between them that pushes them apart. And they really do a good job on the sound. I noticed on the editing of it, because you just hear the clacking of his, like, utensils so much louder
Yeah.
as the movie goes on, and you realize that he's doing it very intentionally, even though he's thinking about all these horrible things he did while doing it.
Yeah. But yeah, so there's a lot of good visuals throughout the movie, and I'm not doing a very good job of describing it, but it's
Well,
good.
it happens all within like one or two rooms of this house, and so it sounds kind of boring when you say that everything happens in two rooms of a house for an entire movie, but they do such a good job of changing it. And also the lighting comes into effect a lot
Oh,
with,
the
so like,
lighting's super good.
they only see the ghost when the lights are out, and then when they turn the
Yeah.
light on, it's off, and you're like, oh, he's safe. But then you start seeing these foot pads coming in the light, so you can still
Yeah.
see that it's
Yeah.
approaching him, and he doesn't.
There's
He's like holding on to the light switch. He's like, should I turn it on or keep it up? Should I keep it on or turn it off? It's like, I don't know. It's like, what's better? Like, is it better to know that?
yeah, there's that scene actually was like a direct flashback to the Invisible Man. With, with the like the foot
Oh, the
prints
new one, the
on
good one. Yes, the good
Oh
one. I
no,
thought
the
you
good
were
one,
talking
the new
about.
one.
Yeah, that was
The
good.
new one, yeah.
You're
The
talking about the
like
one with
new
Chevy
interpretation.
Chase.
I haven't seen that one. I'm talking
It's
about
apparently
with
really bad.
Elizabeth Moss.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
well,
is.
she makes everything good. She's just a really good actress.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so anyways, back to the movie. Um yeah, so we get the backstory of both of them and how they've gotten here, and they're slowly being more and more haunted by this witch, and like all the dead souls from the capsized boat are just showing up and walking around their house and terrorizing especially the husband because
Well, she starts to the great twist of the movie that hasn't been used in other
yeah
movies. The wife fucking starts helping the ghost, and like, it's like
yeah
she totally accepts the ghost, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm on the ghost side, fucker." It's like, have fun.
because
It's
she
like, you're
is
gonna get haunted as shit.
they become more and more separated throughout the course of
Mm-hmm.
the movie because their views become increasingly polarizing, or they're stronger opposing sides than they were at the start of the movie, where they kind of start a little, traumatized, and then they gradually have opposing views. And so the ghosts are not really doing much in the way of hurting the wife, because she kind of is accepting to what we know up to this point,
Mm-hmm.
of the trauma and of her culture, because this ghost is African, so it makes sense that because she is more accepting of their culture, they are kind of, you know, more accepting of her. And we later find out that, oh, okay, it's because they want to use her to get to the husband. So they are kind of like slowly reeling her in, and she becomes more trusting of them and is like, yeah, you know what? Like, maybe I need to do this in order to get my daughter back, because they're promising her that they'll give her daughter back if they just get the husband's soul, and that's all they need. Um, but eventually, um, right before she goes to kill the husband, um, the actual witch doctor no, I'm not describing this properly. So I'll set the scene. Set the scene so
Yeah,
that
yeah. Set up the
he's
final shot of the movie, the final
the
climactic
the
in the
final shot.
kitchen, the
Yes.
dramatic kitchen scene.
So the wife has decided, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna kill my husband so that I can get my daughter back. And he's sitting there eating his food or something. I think he was eating food, and she notices that there's a knife in the kitchen, and so she is not in the kitchen yet, but she keeps kind of looking at the knife and then looking at the husband. And then she goes to the kitchen to get the knife and realizes, oh, the knife's gone. Where did it go? And she sees that her husband has the knife right next to him. Like, he was noticing her looking at the knife.
Well, and the
And
witch doctor has been warning her that her husband is
yeah,
dangerous and that she should be careful about him because he has done terrible things in the past and he's going to do something terrible to you. Like,
yes,
that's what the ghost is filling her thoughts with.
if you don't do this now, he's going to get you, basically.
Yeah.
And he basically just cuts into himself all of a sudden. And it's a deep cut, I will say.
The first cut is the deepest, baby, I know.
Yeah, so he cuts into himself, and then it kind of snaps her out of it. Like, she's like, well, wait, why did you do that? And he's like, don't worry, this will the witch will come for me, and this will lure him in, and we're good. Like, you can live your life, and
You
it's
can
just
have
kind of
your daughter back.
You can have your daughter back, basically.
But even though by this point of the movie, she does understand that isn't her daughter,
yes,
and she has been given the vision by the empath that she helped steal this little girl, and she also helped kill that little girl, and she's not just innocent mom in all of this, and so she's kind of struggling with that in the final scene.
It's like she's in a little bit of denial, and she's having a really hard time accepting that because she's believed this for so long that she just needs to get her daughter back. It's her daughter, but it's really just her mind trying to process what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And while this is all happening, we finally see the witch come out of the wall.
Come out of the goddamn floor. And like a Satan hole opens up in their kitchen.
Opens up in the kitchen.
Fucking sand Satan hole. Just
sand Satan hole. And this is the part that
you started closing your eyes a lot.
Me being the wiener that I am. Up to this point, this movie was very tolerable for anyone afraid of gore, but this was the part where it was like, this freaking witch.
Oh my god.
He sticks his entire hand up this guy's cut in his hand. And you hear all the sounds, and
you see like the witch doctor's hand like go into the cut and start peeling into his flesh, and like you see his fingers moving under the skin. Like, the prosthetics were amazing at the end. Like, those few shots were so beautiful, like so impactful. Just seeing that, like, I've never seen that. You don't see that often in movies.
Watching it at that point. I mean, I watched it after, but like, I was just waiting for you to give me the go ahead.
Your eyes were fully covered. You were in the fetal position at that point on your couch, just
it's been a while,
a tiny ball.
We had to take a long break for my move, so that's what I blame it on, is not having. I've gone back to zero, basically.
Yeah. Well, and the movie lulls you into this like false sense of security where you're like, okay, I saw
they keep cutting away, and there's nothing really that. It's just kind of freaky. It's not gory, and then it's just suddenly like, bam! We're gonna show this super graphic close up of this guy peeling through this guy's arm skin, and that is the exact type of gore that I can't handle, because it's like, okay, if it's just kind of more abstract or like cheesy gore, it's fine, but like, if it's just like a whole head getting chopped off or whatever, it's fine.
It's like peeling a Band-Aid.
But peeling an arm skin, nope. Can't do it.
That was, I completely forgot about that part of the movie when we were watching, and I was like, oh, that's right. That was like, cause I remember the first time I watched it, and I was taken aback by it, because you don't expect him to just be like, into his hand. Just,
why would that be his first choice?
That's your go-to move, is just stick your hand into
a cut.
It's really effective, I'll give him that. But like, you don't see that often, where like or like you see like a ghost just kill them, and they just kind of die off screen, or you hear screaming or something. But it's like this ghost wanted to, I don't know, like consume him or something really bad. Whatever was going to
Yeah.
happen to that guy was not going to be a good time. So to save the day, Mama comes in with the kitchen knife and slashes the thing's throat and essentially decides to save her husband, even though he's done these things and she's hated him for it. She understands that he did it out of love for her. Like everything he did was to save her. He never thought of anybody but her. And so he kind of she damned him for that selfishness in the beginning of the movie, but understood that, she's only alive because of him. She would be dead if it wasn't for him. And she, understands that he is also hurting, and that what he was doing is the same thing as what she was doing, just in a different way. And it's essentially just a giant metaphor for talking to each other, talking about your feelings, and just actually like what happens when two people have gone through the same traumatic experience but aren't willing to explain to each other how it affected them.
Yeah.
Because they both went through the same thing. They both had very different experiences in the same thing. And you can understand both of their points of view and why they would think that way, and especially why the husband would want to deny everything that he did, because he was the one consciously making all those terrible choices, and how the woman would idolize being back there because she was just a passive person during that point. And so for her, she remembered only her friends and her family and the good times. And then it's like, well, they weren't so good near the end. Everyone died. And so you also have to understand and own up to the fact that you did nothing. So what do you even have a place to complain if you aren't willing to talk to him and you aren't willing to admit that he saved your life? You just damn him for that. And so it's a very complicated issue to have. A lot of complicated emotions would arise for a situation like that. And that's kind of the whole point of the movie, is to just like, oh yeah, it's like trauma follows you. It doesn't matter where you go. Like that is the point of the ghost, is the epith, is that it's trauma. It's like you can't outrun it. It is in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And they eventually just stay there. They stay in the house.
Oh yeah, so that's like that's
demons. Yeah.
That's like the ongoing like struggle that they also have, which is almost like, I wonder if it's supposed to be dry British wit or comedy, in the sense that it's almost comical how also at the same time they're having these interviews with Matt Smith and the other government workers, and they're like telling him like, oh, well, mate, if you got to stay in your place, you could get kicked out. And like the end of the movie ends with them having to have like a house inspection, because at one point the guy goes so nuts, he starts hammering holes in the wall. He tears off all the wallpaper and just starts destroying the interior of the house, trying to like find this little girl in the walls. And so they're like, oh, mate, you're going to get kicked out. And the end of the movie is just like them painting the walls and filling the holes in so that the fucking government stooges, don't kick them out. And they're like, well, we don't really like how you tore down the wallpaper, but I guess everything's okay. And they just have a carpet over the hellhole in the kitchen. Yes. Don't look there.
One of the best parts I found was like when Matt Smith and the other dude come in and they're like, what the fuck is going on in here? And then the husband's making up all these excuses, and then the wife walks in and is like, just tell them. Why don't you just tell them?
And she's wearing like she's wearing her like the sheet from her bed wrapped as a traditional African garb, so she just looks Looney Tunes as all can hell.
Walks in and she's like, well, I can't believe he didn't tell you, but yeah, there's a witch doctor that's hanging out through the walls, and we're being haunted by all these ghosts, and he's just not accepting it. And the guys are like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, all right, mate.
All right. Well, leave you up to it.
I gotta report this, mate. It's like all he keeps telling me. The husband's like, please don't report this, please. It's like, it's fine, it's just joking. And they also they only have the one thing that we missed was that when they do get brought to the house, they're told that they have an allowance of £75 a week, and they can't have a job. They can't make any extra income of any kind while they're living there. So they are pretty much forced to live this really horrible, like, minimalist life in this horrible house because they just don't have any money. And if they
Yeah.
make any more money, they'll just be shipped off again too. So it just goes to show like how horribly restricting it is if you are, just a survival, just a refugee. You're just given horrible existence. Like, no human
Yeah.
being should be forced to live on that. Can't even
No, that's horrific.
it's like it costs £10 for like a cup of coffee in Britain. you know? Like, how the hell did they survive?
Well, I remember, when she went to go get groceries and came back, and she just made this beautiful meal, this beautiful African meal with like nothing. It was just like, man. I wonder if that was the whole allowance or if she's just really, really good at being frugal.
Yeah, well, I think it's just like, because, especially coming from third world countries, most countries don't have like the meat options that we have. So there's a lot more like vegetarian based food in parts of the world
Being
that are poorer.
vegetarian is way cheaper, I will say.
As a struggling youth, I can tell you, people many a times thought that I was vegetarian. I'm like, it's not by choice. It's because I'm so poor. It's just
people
cheaper
still
to
think
eat
that
vegetables.
now because I don't put in the effort to cook meat. Like, it's just
so
easier.
Delicious.
It's easier to cook with tofu or something because I don't have to like prepare it.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Toss it in. It just soaks up the flavors. But yeah, we're not. We're not.
Now we're getting into our tofu cooking portion of our horror podcast.
We're on the tofu section. Welcome. But yeah, so I guess we finally got past the gore aspect of it, and since we are more of like a nerdy gore podcast, I guess
slow on the gore scale.
The gore is minimal. So I would say as a rating, I would give it like an 8 out of 10. Like, it's very watchable. It's just that one part. I have to knock off 2 points for that because the gore there is pretty intense if you are like me and you don't like close up body gore. And it's very realistic.
Oh yeah, the prosthetics of that arm were just
very realistic.
haunting.
Maybe the thing with that stuff, it's like if I was on set and I could see the prosthetic and I could see them doing it, that would be great. I would love to see that. But because it's movie magic, they make it look so real and it just cuts straight to a close-up of this prosthetic arm and it's just so nasty. So
I would have loved to have been on set the day that they filmed that, just like seeing like this horrible, like 8-foot tall naked man with horrible contacts in, just inserting his hand into a dude's wound and just being an outside observer and just seeing the real life people filming that scene.
Oh, it's like, just so gross. Like, I would be fascinated, but I'd be really grossed out by it at the same time. Oh, just the concept of it alone is like, all right, someone thought of this. Thought of a really gross thing to do. And it seems actually like, of all gory things to do that's impactful and cheap, like they made a good decision.
It's so effective. Like, this movie must have been. It's a BBC production, so it's not like it's super expensive. But BBC, like, those British horror movies are really good at slow burns and just using a little to make a lot. And I would say that it's just really effective because it's such a slow kind of burn. But it's like there's nothing scary for the first 20 minutes, but you definitely notice as the movie goes on, they're good at escalating how often he sees these things and when he sees them, and they change up when he sees them. And it's not just like, it's not like The Nun, where it's the stupid nun in a basement that just randomly runs at you every
Oh,
once in a while and goes, "Eh," and no one remembers what the hell happened in it. I guess the nun, well, didn't get exercised because they were in the other stupid, what the hell are those, even the Conjuring movies? Uh,
oh yeah, I've not really
yeah.
watched that.
Well, yeah, it's just cheap jump scares, and it's so lazy. It's like, so they made a movie about the nun, and it's a spooky nun that's a demon nun, and that's the movie. And I remember nothing of it, and it's horribly forgettable. But this, I feel so bad that this movie isn't like more talked about. I've never seen anyone talk about it. I've never like heard people mention this to me. Not that most people mention the movies that I watch to me, but it's,
Yeah, I
no,
hear you there. I mean, I feel like a lot of the movies that I like watching, I think we can talk about them. Because I have an interest in horror, but I'm just bad at watching it.
that's why it's
But
fun because I know that you're at
yeah,
least game for it. So I could.
yeah, I'm definitely game for it because it's funny because I was like hanging out with a friend this weekend and I was talking about creepy related movies and stuff and immediately was just like, oh, I can't watch that stuff. Oh, I can't even talk about this. It's like, okay.
I can't even talk about it.
Well, I mean, it's funny because it's hard because I don't think people necessarily expect me or even you to have like such a fascination with horror
Yeah,
because we are both goofy people. So it's just like it's like at
yeah,
a
yeah.
level
It's like,
that
hey,
you
have you?
don't expect. It's like a jump where it's like I don't know. I have a fascination um with prosthetics of like gore prosthetics
Art
and
of it is
like
amazing.
practical effects, all that stuff. I find it so fascinating, and I find the filmmaking aspect of it really cool. You know, like you can do so much with just manipulating the viewer's perception of what's going on, or like the emotions that someone's feeling.
Yeah, and
Um,
yeah, I love that. Like, I think horror movies, like low budget horror movies done well, are just like the pinnacle of like imagination and creation because you are literally scaring people with nothing. You have so little to work with. It's just your
yeah,
own vision of being able to freak people out through, yeah, close cuts and like sound effects and showing less than what the audience wants to see so that you, because that's what the one of my favorite quotes ever was an interviewer with J.R.R. Tolkien, and they were asking him, he's like, well, why do you never describe what Sauron looks like? Why? And he's like, well, the whole point of him never being in the book or described is that he not knowing what he looks like is far more terrifying than
oh yeah,
anything that I could create because everyone will create the scariest version of him for themselves. All they know about him is that he is a giant, his one eye is a giant flaming eyeball that can look around the entire world and see everything. So it's like,
oh,
well,
it's
what the fuck?
perfect.
If that's just his eyeball, like, holy shit, you can't let that guy get the ring because he's Satan,
Oh
So
yeah,
you don't
yeah,
know
no, I
what he
totally
is.
agree. I I still haven't read those books, but I think
Ugh,
just I've heard kind of they're
they're
hard to get
hard.
through. Yeah, maybe as an audiobook. My
Yeah. You
attention
should. Oh,
span
they
is
they made a
terrible.
really great British radio play version of it.
Oh, really? That
Yeah,
could be
yeah,
fun to listen to. But yeah,
yeah. But
I think the Eye of Sauron is a really good example because it's this all it's almost like this all-knowing entity that has its eye literally on this entire region of the world and you can't escape it. It's just this thing overlooking you and all it does is it doesn't even really make sounds. It can just see you, but yet it communicates like telepathically or whatever to
yeah,
all
well,
of its little minions that like can
yeah,
go and just
murder
murder,
everything.
go
Yeah,
kill them.
it's like a whole land of hell at his disposal, and he like
It's really
has.
well done. And just like that that image of it just like looming over you. Like you can look up and you just see this flaming eye. Like
It's
that's
horrifying. Yeah.
perfect. It's
And
perfect. Yeah.
poor Frodo puts on the ring, and it immediately looks right at him and starts mumbling crazy shit into his head. Blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. You don't know what he's saying to him, but clearly it's probably not cool.
Just based on Frodo's reaction of like,
That'd be really funny if there was actually like there's someone like there's a translation of what Sauron says to him, and he's like super petty. He's like, "You're such a piece of shit, Frodo. You're never gonna get the ring. I'm gonna get the ring. You suck." And that's like all he says to him. He's just like this really snide, shitty, petty person.
Or it's like some super weird shit where he's like, next time you go to sleep, Frodo, I'm gonna stick a raw hot dog up your asshole or something. And
I'm gonna make you
like,
piss your pants. I'm gonna put it in a warm cup of water, and you're gonna piss your pants.
I'm gonna stir your tea with a hot dog, and you won't know. So next time you take a sip of it, it's actually just gonna be like hot dog water, and
Yeah,
it's real gross. And everyone was like, "What the fuck?
it's just like sweating.
Hot dog water. I hate hot dogs. I hate them. It's so cruel to make hot dogs." Anyways, we're going off on a tangent here.
This is what we need to make now, the translated version of what Sauron says to people when they put the ring on.
Good idea.
Yeah, it's just like, your room is so messy, you're never going to get promoted.
Oh, yeah, just
really, really petty things.
Brutal.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, that's why it's like less is so much more, and I think this movie does a great job of doing less.
I agree, and I figure you suggested this before we started recording, but we should end this with reading some reviews of this movie.
Please tell me. It's like it part like I'm half of me is always thinks they're hilarious, and the other half of me just wants to cry, because that's the general like mood of people who watch these movies, is that it's boring or slow. Well, for example, it's funny. I'm not going to go on a giant rant about Marvel movies, but we watched the new Spider-Man movie last night, and Vanessa just says like, that movie is so boring. Nothing happened in it. It was just like, you saw things from other movies, but there wasn't a story. It's just people doing stuff that and that was the movie.
Oh god, I could go on a rant about that. It's like this might be like a podcast for a different day, but the new Chip and Dale trailer.
I saw that. I'm like, this is the most nostalgia shit ever.
Oh, it looks so bad. It looks terrible, and okay, so like I
love Chip and Dale as a child, by the way.
Yeah, me too. I loved that cartoon, but like just a little tiny snippet. I won't go off too long about this, but just trying to talk about this with my team at work. Someone sent the trailer, and I was like, "Okay, don't rant. You don't need to rant." But I couldn't hold myself back, and I wrote a little snippet, like just a little bit, because of how I feel like I was somehow just triggered by the trailer on multiple levels, because I was just like,
trigger warning.
This movie is like, it's like if all of these big hat executives got into a room and they were reading reviews of why people disliked recent Disney movies, and they're like, all right, what if we just made a Chip and Dale movie and we just address all these complaints in one movie and make it like super woke? And it's like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's just do that.
Chip and Dale woke.
And they just string in they don't even have a script yet, but they just use these complaints as like, and try to address them by Frankensteining them into a script. And it's like, yeah, let's do like this a commentary on how like I don't even like what, like the CG surgery, like what the fuck is that?
Yeah, I was so sad when they showed Roger Rabbit. When Roger Rabbit
in there, and they're like, oh, there's not enough 2D animation or like original things in films. It's like, yeah, let's do that, except we don't really have the budget to do good 2D animation on the main character.
Roger Rabbit looks shittier than when he was in his original movie.
So that was 2D that was real 2D animation, but cheap 2D animation. but they made one of, I don't remember if it's Chip or if it's Dale. Probably
Ch-
Dale is the one that
Dale's
still.
3D.
Oh, Dale's through the 3D one. Okay, well,
Yeah,
Chip
he's the
is
Magnum
still
PI.
2D, so he was animated 3D, and they just like made him cell shaded basically. So, like,
Oh, really? I didn't even watch that part. I didn't even notice that.
anyways,
That's probably what it is. He's not even 2D. He's
no,
just
he's not even 2D because they couldn't afford
2D
good
shaded.
2D, so they just had him animated and like God, and that one part where it was like this character didn't have the eye line wasn't correct. It's like that's such an animation joke. Like who is gonna
Oh, yeah. And Seth Rogen's the
Yeah, and Seth
voice of that
Rogen is
character. It's like,
voicing him.
who's he in the movie?
It's an animation joke. Like who's gonna get it? It's like, yeah, that's the number one note, by the way. If anyone, a
Yeah.
non-animator is listening to this, the number one note I get on my shots is that the eye line is not correct because it's
Oh,
really difficult to get the eye line spot on. It's a little pixel. That's all it is. It's just a pixel over and then it's perfect.
mm-hmm.
But if the character moves or shakes its head, you have to like keep that manually there. There are ways to get around that if you want, but anyways.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's such an animation joke. It's like, what's the point? But
People aren't
anyways,
going
I
to
went
get
on
that
like a little
joke.
rant, and it just seemed like a total cash grab that people in the comments, for some reason, think it looks amazing. And all the animators I'm speaking to are like, this looks so bad. This looks terrible. Why?
It just doesn't make sense. Like, I don't care. I just want to see Fat Cat and Monterey Jack and was it Gadget and Buzzer, and I want to see them living in a tree doing Chip
Yeah.
and Dale shit. I don't like the most like inside joke in Chip and Dale is that Dale looks like Magnum PI and Chip looks like an old timey gumshoe
Yeah.
detective, and that's the only kind of like joke they have about them kind of being real people. Other than that, they're just chipmunks that live in a goddamn tree. They're not like these cultural icons that have agents in the real world. And yes, if you're going to try to make Roger Rabbit again, don't do it shitty, because everyone is just going to compare it to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is like the pinnacle of animation and live action together. And it's made fucking now 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and it's still the best version of live action and 2D.
Oh, it is. Yeah,
or any animation.
It was animated by an icon, and basically no one can live up to Richard Williams' technical abilities because he's like he's an animation icon. Anyways, we don't need to go further into this, but
I do have a fun story because I worked with one of the animators who worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and my very first job ever as an animator, I just accidentally got put beside him, and he won the Annie for being the lead animator on Hades and Hercules. And he also was like the lead animator on the Raccoon and Pocahontas and stuff. And so like people kept like coming over to him with like concept books and getting him to sign them. And like one day I was like, why do people keep like getting you to sign books for them? He's like, oh, you know, I worked in Disney for a while, and then all this stuff. And then I was like, oh, really? I was like, could you tell me some of the stories? And he's like, well, actually, before I worked at Disney, I worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And one day, Steven Spielberg came in with a young little boy named Christian Bale, and he met Christian Bale when he was like a 12-year-old boy filming Empire of the Sun with Steven Spielberg. And he just said he came in one day and he was just there. And then he's like, yeah, I watched like Batman like 20 years later. And I was like, holy crap, it's the little boy. He's Batman now. And it came full circle for him. I was like, holy shit, that's an amazing story.
Oh, God.
He met John Candy. He met John Candy on The
You
Rescuers. The Rescuers Down Under. I was like, you got to meet John Candy. And this is a very deep Canadian animation cut, but for me, it's very special to me. He worked on the CBC show The Raccoons.
Oh, shit. That's cool.
I didn't give a shit about his Disney resume. The Raccoons. That's what I wanted to know. He was a goddamn legend. He worked on The Raccoons. And apparently, like, tons of Disney alumni before they became great Disney animators worked on The Raccoons because they all came from Sheraton Animation School.
Yeah.
And they all
couldn't afford that one.
Oh God, yeah. So Yeah, that's great. So yeah, that's fun
Nice.
raccoons. So anyone out there, you watch the goddamn raccoons on CBC because that shit's
Hell
legit.
yeah. My favorite was I was a little too young for the raccoons. I loved sticking around.
Oh, that's like the stick drawing show. Yeah,
Yeah. And
there
the
was.
one guy would just, all he would say is just, holy mackerel. And he had like a mouthful of braces and he would just spit on people. I loved that show. And my 2D animation instructor worked on that. And I just thought it was the best thing ever. It's like, oh, it's my favorite show. Now looking back, just like, that show probably wasn't that hard to animate on. It's just spit.
So easy, and the backgrounds were just colored gibberish. Like,
Oh, it's just a mess. It was like like the middle of the '90s, and everything was super bright and like flashy and
yeah,
just a mess.
yeah. Because
But yeah,
I worked at the studio that made Sticking Around, and in the bathroom they just had a giant cell shaded frame picture of one of the Sticking Around cells.
nice.
Where I
I
was
love
going, I'm like,
that show.
oh, Sticking Around. Yeah, I remember
Sticking
that looked like.
around.
I remember as a kid, I was like, that looks like crap.
Yeah, oh yeah, loved it. Loved that shit. Anyways, yeah,
A
I'll
little
read some
Canadian
reviews
media.
back to.
Yes. We've got a little
Okay.
Canadian animation tangent rant about the state of 2D live action movies, but now
It's
we're
just
ready to read comments.
it's just the charm of our podcast, you know. Like you never know what you're gonna get. It's lots of tangents.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
probably have like we'll have a few followers eventually.
Don't expect a cohesive storyline in anything.
But yeah, I have a few reviews up. I have not read them in advance, so hopefully we'll see.
Either read the ones that are really long or really short.
I have I have one that's 4 out of 10 stars
Okay, yeah, yeah.
from Fella Shibby, and it's titled "Well acted with a nice twist, but it ain't a horror film. It ain't a slow burner too, which is a good thing." That's the title.
It ain't a
And
slow burner, but it's not a horror movie.
it ain't a slow burner too, which is a good thing. Okay, whatever.
But it is a slow burn. It's super slow.
It is, but it's like, well, I'll read the review.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
It says, it's not spooky or creepy. Maybe some wannabe critics may term it as a horror film because of the trauma the couple went through, or maybe because of the evil men can do. One tribe butchering another tribe, or maybe because of the folie du.
Does he keep saying maybe?
Yeah, he says maybe instead of maybe.
Oh, it hurts my brain.
The performances by the two lead actors is top notch. The film ain't boring and moves at a decent pace, but it ain't a horror film. That's cool.
San Cletus. Slackjaw yokel. Maybe. I don't know. That ending is pretty. Like, it's so funny. People have, like, such a. I don't know, a stone set idea of what a horror movie should be. And
yeah.
It's just so funny that if there isn't certain things, they don't consider it a horror movie. But, like, horror isn't just monsters killing people or like Freddy running down the street after you in your nightmares. It's horror is life. That is why horror movies exist. And that's why
types of horror. Like I almost see it as a feeling when you're watching something. It's like if it gives you a pit in your stomach and it's making you feel dread, I would say that's a horror. And I would say like horror and thriller can be a little bit of a fine line because thriller, I would attach a little bit more of like a faster paced, actiony, psychological element to it. Not all thrillers are psychological, but
it's like Seven. Seven's a great example of a thriller.
Even The Invisible Man, like we were saying before, I would say that is more of a thriller because it's faster pace. Like she's sort of fighting for her life. It's a little bit more of a mystery. I don't know. It's a fine line.
Yeah. He's just a guy. Like he's just an obsessive dude chasing her. So I'd say you're right.
It's a little bit more actiony. I don't know how to describe. Would you agree or do you think it's different?
Well, I wouldn't say that The Invisible Man is very action packed in the sense that a lot of the scenes are just Elizabeth Moss being scared in a room by herself. And she does a really good job of selling it. But I would say that it is more of a thriller. Like, it's associated with a famous Hammer Horrorstein like monster. But at the same time, the Invisible Man is the least monstrous. He's just a dude that creates an invisible formula in the original
Yeah.
one, and he's kind of evil. I think he steals shit in the original one. So he's not like a monster like a vampire or Frankenstein's monster or the creature from the Black Lagoon. Like, those are what people associate with horror because they are
Oh
horror
yeah.
monsters. The
I
Wolf
guess
Man.
when I say thriller, I'm sorry, thriller. When I say action, I'm thinking. I guess it's more of like a feeling of like a sense of urgency, like
The
something needs
pace.
to
Yeah, the
happen. The
intense.
pacing of it is faster. Like it's horror can be very slow and dreadful and just like has like punches of
Mm-hmm.
elements of surprise or whatever. But with a thriller, it sort of has a similar feeling as to when I am watching an action film. Like there is sort of this urgency that something needs to happen or you need to get away from something.
Yeah.
But that also happens in horror movies, so it's kind of a hard thing to describe.
Well, there's this other actually slow burning British, and I would say it's a horror movie, even though there aren't any monsters in it whatsoever. It's called Censor, and it's about this woman who is works for the Censor Bureau of Britain or something, whatever it's called, and she reviews horror movies and decides whether they can be shown or not,
Hmm.
and makes the edits. And so through watching these horror movies, her life starts to kind of unravel because of her own trauma. And so that movie is very slow paced. And I would say that is a horror movie because I think it's more about, I don't know, at least for me, horror requires it to be something within your own mind that only character is aware of. No one else can appreciate or understand what that character is going through, in the sense that they are going through something very specifically related to themselves, and maybe other characters are also doing that, but they're isolated, and that
Hmm.
creates the fear. Is that great horror movies isolate you. They make you feel that there's nobody who is going to help you and there's no safety anywhere. And thriller movies are more about the imminent threat of somebody doing something to you, something happening to you, instead of you being the person who is responsible. Like, it has already happened to you. You are just
Mhm.
now living through what you have already done. A thriller,
Right.
you are living the action of the trauma that they're going to have. And horror movies address, you have already done this thing, and now you
Gotcha.
have to deal with
That
the
makes some
emotional
yeah,
repercussions of that.
that makes sense, yeah. I like that assessment.
Kind of, yeah, like there's other people almost. It's like,
Yeah, and that kind of rings true to a lot of horror movies
and
that
all
I've
the
seen.
best ones are really good at like showing, like, that's why I love horror movies, is because I can empathize with someone being trapped and alone and this horrible thing is happening to them. It's like, I watched this TV show on Amazon Prime, which I highly recommend, called Them. And it's about a black family moving to LA in the 50s, into Compton, actually. And now we know Compton to be a very black neighborhood, but it was an all white community
Right.
back in the 50s. And it was everyone fleeing the South from, the horrible racism of Jim Crow. And so they flee and come to LA, where they think their life is going to be better, but it's just filled with horrible, racist white people. And you
Yeah.
feel so bad for this family, because it's like playing this really happy song in the beginning. They're driving into the neighborhood, and as they drive farther into the neighborhood and more people start to realize that they're African American, like, people stop watering their lawn, they're just staring at them. And progressively over the course of the show, they're just these like awful, awful white women that won't leave this poor family alone, because they're like they're like beaten by their fucking terrible husbands, who are just assholes from World War II. And so they take out their like oppression from their husbands on this poor black family, and just do awful, awful things to them. Like, they'll just stand outside of their house and blast music, but there's just like 50 women just standing there blasting music and
Oh,
staring into their windows. Like, it's terrifying. You don't know what they're going to do. They don't do anything, but it's just the fact that they're there and they are just overwhelmingly surrounding them, and it just makes you feel so isolated and
oh,
terrified.
that sucks.
And also
Yeah.
there's ghosts.
Oh, okay. Another aspect. Cool.
And their house is also haunted. So they live in a haunted house, and there's horrible racist white women constantly trying to fuck with them.
Oh, it's the two worst things.
Ghosts and white women. Oh boy, no
God.
one's gonna watch this now.
Okay, I'll read two more reviews and then we can wrap it up. Okay, this one is by Jay Tindahouse.
Jay Tindahouse.
Jay Tindahouse in the house. And his reviews is 5 out of 10, and it's called "The bulk of the movie so bland and unscary that by the time it has something to say, it's lost you." He says, "The problem his house has is that it has an interesting plot twist to deliver to the audience near the end. However, if it hasn't completely lost you already by that point, then you have a lot more patience than I do. Or you just have a very bad attention span, I will say. The film plays itself off to be a regulation ghost story, but they do that side of things so poorly that it becomes unbearably tedious very quickly. By the time it comes to show us that what is actually going on, I had zero enthusiasm left available to care. The story I thought would have actually been more interesting was the genuine struggles that refugees go through acclimatizing to a new country. The little hints of glimpses of that we were given were far more interesting to me than a ghost running behind the walls of a house. The film doesn't really have any star power in the cast, and so all of the characters come across extremely blandly. Matt Smith is actually in the film, however, he's given so little to work with that it might as well have been anybody. I respect what his house was trying to do, but in order for it to work, it had to either go a different path or it had to make the ghosts in the house element actually scary and interesting to watch. For me, in films like this, less is always more. The film showed way too much, and once you have seen what you've meant to be afraid of, you very rarely ever continue to be. This was a missed opportunity. 2 out of 4 people found this helpful. I mean,
he contradicts himself in his own review of either like it needs to be slower review, but faster. Like it has to show less.
At least it was better. It was written a little bit better than the last review.
Certainly his English, his command of the English language was better.
Yes.
But I just get so frustrated when people think that star power is necessary for a movie and then it bothers people. Power.
They both did very well in their roles. I feel like everyone played their roles really well. I saw no issue with any of it.
Well, and the female actor who played the wife, she's actually, not like a household name, but she's in a goddamn Marvel Loki TV show. She was in Lovecraft County. She's in HBO TV shows. She clearly...
she was a great actress, and the guy was really well done as well, and Matt Smith played his role well. And I don't think he necessarily was distracting either, because he is sort of like... he's star power, but nope, you don't care that he's Matt Smith. He just plays a dick in the movie, and you're like, fuck, I hate this guy.
Yeah, and I was glad that he was willing to be in it, because clearly he is the biggest draw of the movie, is that Matt Smith is a very well-known British actor.
I think it was good, and I don't think it was too slow. I actually, when you said it was a slow burn, maybe I just like slower movies. I don't mind slower movies, but I actually found the pacing to be pretty adequate, because it started out slow but not boring to me, and then
fascinating to see where they're going.
It's slow, but you immediately know that there's something wrong with that house, and that is introduced at the start of the movie, and then within 20 minutes you get your first jump scare, which is the crow coming out of the walls, and then he starts gradually seeing more shit. And maybe that could be seen as slow burn, but stuff is happening. It's not like they're sitting in a room and there's no progression of the plot. The plot is progressing, and then it just kind of hits an ultimate high point near the end of the movie. So the climax, I don't know, I feel like it's adequately paced, and it's not like the climax is literally the end. It's right before the end, but I would say that's pretty common for movies for that to
That's,
happen. It's not
that's how it
like
works.
that's
You don't
a
want another.
classical upward drop. I think for this one, it wasn't like straight up down. It was kind of like slow and then like arcs up and then down. Fine.
Yeah.
Fine for
I'd
me.
say it does a good job of increasing the intensity throughout the movie. It
Yeah.
doesn't really ever drop it. It just continues to rise until
Yeah.
the end.
And I would say like this movie isn't for everybody because say if you are someone that just really likes classic slasher films and that's the kind of horror that you only really like to watch, so yeah, don't watch this. Like if you even just looking at the title of the movie, the plot of like the synopsis of the movie, it seems a little closer to like an indie horror film than like a big box office
Oh,
like It
definitely.
2 or whatever.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's not gonna be $1 million box office hit. It's
I'll
just
say
not.
I was way more afraid of this movie than it too.
I haven't even seen It 2 yet.
Don't. It's so bad. It's so boring. It's 3 hours long, and there's like an
Oh
hour
no.
and a half of just
I didn't
nothing in the
mind
middle.
the first one.
The first one was like, I after watching that second one, I was like, wow, okay, I like the first one more. It's still not a great movie, but it's a
Yeah.
fuckload better than it. They CGI de-age little children in the movie. That's all I gotta say. That
Oh
is
dear.
so distracting because some of the children hit puberty, so they de-age their faces and voices, and it is so off-putting seeing a fake face on a small boy. It's like, ugh.
Oh,
It's so creepy. Yeah.
okay.
That's fun.
I
All
will
right, let's hear
read
some more.
one more, but I will read a positive one. There's so many
Ah.
5 out of 10 stars here.
It's funny that people give like these arbitrary numbers. It's like 5 out of 10, where it's like, okay, you didn't like the movie at all, but you still said it's 50%, but you don't recommend it to anybody.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I'm not sure which one to pick. I'll pick this one because it's near the top, and 13 out of 18 people found this helpful. It's by
Ooh.
Cosmasp, and it's titled "Whose House?" Question mark.
Ooh, I like the mystery.
They rated it 9 out of 10. And it says, talk about a slow burn of a movie. Again, I don't think it's that slow burn, but that's okay. Some may read horror movie and think this will be just one jump scare after another. And while there are some of those, this builds up, and in quite the original and weird fashion. The fear of living, of being in your own apartment house cannot be put into words. Well, not accurately, that is, which is why this is also a visual treat. Okay. A horror movie that has quite impact or is able to if you let it. Visually stunning and creepy as it can be. The pacing probably will be an issue for some, but if it
You shouldn't
isn't
say
for you,
visually
do it.
stunning.
Yeah. Watch it. You should be able to tell if you like this after the first 15 minutes or so, and you can watch it again and again because this is a horror movie on the surface. There's a lot more beneath it. I mean,
It might be a
they
little
liked it.
too
They
glowing.
liked it. I
It's a,
don't understand the review very well.
it's a watch again and again type of movie. Like, it's not like, Fight Club, where you're gonna see it through a different lens the second time or something. It's a good horror movie, I'd say, but
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a review that makes sense. I can't
yeah,
find.
because it doesn't really action packed, visually stunning. I wouldn't necessarily say that.
There's so many bad reviews on here. Um,
You get any horror movie that doesn't just have people getting their heads chopped off, and that will happen.
okay, here's one, and this one. Okay, we'll see. 9 out of 10. It says another underrated gem, a unique thriller with a touch of horror. I really enjoyed this movie. How anyone could rate it? Any but God. How do I read these?
Any
How
but
anyone could rate it any but a 7 or better is beyond me. It's not your Friday the 13th horror. It's a mix of thriller with a demon-inspired horror twist. The two lead actors
there's
were
no demons.
phenomenal, and the cinematography or the filming was excellent. Watch it with the idea it's not your usual horror at its heart. It made me feel like I really need to change my thought process about immigrants. Bravo. Okay, I don't know. I'm just going to stop reading reviews that turned out.
Maybe changed my thoughts about immigrants. I don't want to know what your thoughts about immigrants were before this movie.
Okay, I'm going to stop reading. Yeah, I don't know. IMDb, it's all. There's no critic reviews. I could go to Rotten Tomatoes and read some critic reviews, I guess. But
it's so funny because anyone who spends their time writing those reviews on like IMDb generally are, whether it's positive for the movie or negative, it's poorly written, because people who actually have something thoughtful and critical to say will not post it on the IMDb comment section.
Okay, I have to say his house on IMDb has like mostly 5 out of 10 ratings. On Rotten Tomatoes, the critic review is 100%.
Oh shit, really? 100%? Yes. Damn, and we picked a good one.
Yeah, and 74% audience score. So like, wow, it's so much better.
Okay, no one talk about this movie. So disappointing.
I'll just read one review from a critic. I know I keep saying just one. Oh god, but it's so... Where is it? His house.
So fascinating, though.
I want a review that does it justice.
Like from an actual critic who may have actually proofread his review.
Yeah.
Does it sound like a moron? It good when not bad. 5 out of 5.
Oh god, but they're all so long. Give me a little snippet.
Taste. We're having a log line, you know.
Okay, I'll just read the log line. Yeah. So, from Roxana Haddadi, she says, "Your life is not yours, you stole it," whispers one of the figures tormenting the pair, and that self-doubt is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. His house is top-tier horror. There you go.
Yeah. Top tier.
Cool. That's a good one to end on. Someone who actually has a good, succinct opinion.
Properly spell checked.
It is painful reading reviews from IMDb. I'm not going to lie. I had better hopes. A lot of them ramble, awesome. But I have to say, like, our podcast is a little rambly, so maybe I should not judge.
That's true.
We went on a tangent about Chip and Dale for about 20 minutes. So.
We're the verbal equivalent of an IMDb review. It meanders and goes nowhere, really. You learn some things, but I'm not sure. That's the review of our podcast.
Yes. My overall opinion, as someone that is a wiener for gore, a gore wiener, is that it's a good movie to watch. I would highly suggest it. Gore-wise, it might be a little hard for one section. So there you go. And everybody, watch more horror.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we'll be back to show you. I next time I'll pick something that's a little more gore challenging. I wanted to get artsy and show something more mentally stimulating over
gore challenging. Gore. Great. All right.
So
we'll be back next time. I will be thoroughly traumatized.
Oh yes, I'm conjuring up gory movies as we speak. I think I'll have a good one for you next time.
All right. Well, that's it for this time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right, podcast's over.